Hello and welcome back to another Tactica Tuesday. As always, I am your primary host, James, joined by my, I guess, rather minor compatriot, Paul, who chips in every now and again. Hey, Paul, how are you doing?
Less importance means less responsibility, and I am all
Well,
for that.
you're welcome to take it however you wish. Completely joking. Paul, I could not do this show without you, so I'm glad you're
Oh,
here.
I love you too.
No, let's not take it that far. I'm not saying that yet. Alrighty. Well, once again, we have another somewhat action-packed show, I guess. We're not joined by a guest this week, simply due to both Paul and myself being dads and having children. We actually had to do this show not pre-recorded this week, which is obviously abnormal for us, and trying to make a guest kind of juggle their schedule to line up with both of ours, quite honestly didn't seem fair. And I like to give our guests a bit more prep time because honestly they typically do more prep than either Paul or myself do. I think
Yeah,
that's fair to say.
yeah. Now I
But
see why Vince and Tom do this guest thing all the time. Makes it a little easier on them.
right, right. Well, this week we are covering picking your general in Age of Sigmar and really the importance of building your army and kind of how to build your army around said general. But before we get into that, Paul, I'm going to go ahead and throw it to you because you're the only one who has any important news this week for us.
Yes, I just want to highlight real quick the registration date deadline is coming up on the Crossroads GT, September 16th through 18th. I'm trying to find confirmation of when the registration actually closes on that. I believe it's the end of August, but I'm not 100% sure. Um, the signups for that are starting to pick up, so that is looking like it's going to shape up to be a pretty solid Age of Sigmar event. So we'll throw a link for that down in the gobbledygook down below, and you guys can check that out. I am going to try and make it out there. I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to. I am going to do my best, though. Get you guys some sweet Age of Sigmar battle reports if I can.
And of course, if you live locally, that means that you want to make it for two reasons, really. Because then, one, you meet a extremely minor YouTube celebrity, and because that's what we all are, right? And we're the most minor of minor. And number two, you have the great potential bragging rights of beating the lesser win rate host on this show. So you can beat the tactician at his own game, right? And I'm joking. That's part of the reason I have the higher win rate, honestly, is because I've not gotten to play as many games as Paul. So if I had, my average would probably go down a fair bit. But anyway,
Faced a bunch of stone horns coming down your neck either.
that is true. There is a local player who plays them, and in the one game which I was going to play against that, the specific scenario rules did not allow for him to bring that army. So thus far, I've luckily dodged that bullet.
Yeah.
Instead, he played dwarves, and that was his first time playing them, and with the new General's Handbook match play system. So fortunately, I would say he wasn't as well prepared as he would have otherwise been, and that was probably the greatest game of Age of Sigmar I've ever played. So in a perfect storm, I dodged a bullet and managed to get an important win for Death during the big Season War campaign.
Oh, and how did that end up turning out for Death, by the way? Just curious. I heard it went pretty well for them, right?
No. The results, if you haven't seen, are already out. They've posted them to their Facebook page. A couple of times, actually, and they've been spread around, honestly, quite a bit. From a narrative perspective, I was rather disappointed. I knew that Order was probably going to win. Order has the largest player base in the world of all these four Grand Alliances. I know locally that Order came in second at almost every single store, and the only reason that they didn't win each store was each store basically had one or two people that were just determined to have their faction, whether it was chaos, destruction, or death, really pull it out. So at the store that I went to, myself and the guy who actually runs most of the events at the store both play death, and we made sure with a lot of, I guess, clever painting choices to make sure that death at least won at that store. And then I know two of the other ones, there was a chaos and a destruction win. But if you haven't seen already, everybody lost except for Order, and no one has a particularly interesting story from a narrative perspective thus far. As a result of it, it was like Death's armies were destroyed, but big whoop, they're dead, they'll come back. Destruction basically went and fought, and then the fighting was over, so they left. Chaos lost and is going to continue to be broody and angry and plot revenge, so do what Chaos has been doing the whole time in Age of Sigmar. And Order won a great victory and continues to expand, which has been the narrative thus far in Age of Sigmar, basically unopposed.
Yeah.
So the plot twist that I was hoping for didn't happen.
I can't wait for there to be a Chaos counterattack at some point, or for there to be like, you know, Nagash finally grows a pair and starts invading everybody hardcore, or, you know, there's a giant wall coming down from somewhere. I don't know. Something interesting is Order can't just keep winning, and they've got to come up with some sort of other thing that makes the Stormcast just like knocks them on their heels for a little while. You know?
Right. I think the biggest thing really with the Stormcast is that they're very numerically limited. That's their greatest weakness right now. And as the story has progressed, there's been more and more ways kind of introduced that they can die for good, which is obviously, you know, the one thing that a Stormcast should fear, because ordinarily they just keep coming back. And, you know, from a narrative perspective, I think that they're really at a point where they have to do something like that, because, you know, if you look at the way Age of Sigmar's played out, it's very much similar to the Allies invading Normandy during World War II. It's this very initial, heavy, bloody push. But then once they get past that point, you know, they're gaining more land and gaining more land because they're kind of past the initial chaos bastions of defense. But, you know, the inevitable counterattack has to come. And if they're going to model this at all after how real warfare works. And so even as Order kind of consolidates their holdings, I think that pretty soon we should see a counterattack by Chaos and something else interesting. Or at least I'm hoping. But that's enough on the narrative. Yeah. Yeah.
What I'd like to see is some big crazy thing to come out, like some, I don't know, some new breed of orcs that we've never seen before, or some new set of death dudes that we've never seen before that are even more powerful than the rank and file Stormcast, and really start pushing back on them for a while. And then it works narratively to be like, okay, now Sigmar is going to open the next chamber to counterattack.
Right. Yeah, because really right now the only things that have consistently bested a Stormcast one-on-one is like an elite thing that there's not a lot of, like a Morghast, something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, that's all narratively based, and we're really here to discuss the tactics and the nitty-gritty and the I guess cutthroat nature of such hardcore play.
Yep.
So now we move on to, I guess, my favorite segment, which is the pick of the week. And I'll go ahead and go first with that because I have two. The first one is I want to shout out once again the YouTube channel 2+ Tough, which is all written out, but it's all one word, like there's no spaces. He's a relatively new YouTube channel. I think since we last shouted him out last week, he's gained about 13 subs. I don't know if any of them were directly related, but I can hope to continue to help his channel if so. Anyways, he does a lot of great content, even though it's a small, relatively new channel in terms of the number of videos he's done. He does tactical videos where he kind of does insight. He has a video where he talks about which army he thinks is currently the most powerful and really kind of deep dives on why. He also does narrative reviews, which is clearly something up my alley since that's what I started this YouTube channel with and hope to be able to do from time to time again. But anyway, I will link him below. Specifically, I've really enjoyed his narrative reviews because I don't really see a lot of that out there in the YouTuber community. And he deep dives, but he also keeps them pretty concise, which is, in my opinion, a talent of its own to be able to do both. So I'll link specifically his narrative reviews below, but you should check out all of his stuff on his channel. It's really good. And the second one I wanted to shout out is Nicholas Bolaire's update to the Flesh Eater courts and kind of what's changed between the match play system and everything that came prior for this army. He did a great video whenever the Flesh Eater courts first came out, because that was the army that he was interested in. So he really took a very hard look at them and analyzed them, probably more than anybody that I've seen. And he did this great video where he had like a chart of basically here's everything they have to do or that they can do in the hero phase, which was ridiculous. They basically have an entire turn, full game turn within their hero phase, or at least the potential to. And he talked about, here's a lot of strengths and how you can play the army effectively based upon this kind of scenario or this kind of scenario. And he kind of goes back and revisits that and what's changed with the points in Age of Sigmar, and it's well worth checking out. So I'll also link that video down below.
Awesome. That is actually both of those are two channels that I really need to check out more. I have been slacking a little bit and watching a lot of Warhammer YouTube content recently. I've been off on other tangents on the YouTubes while I'm at work. But I did actually watch something pretty awesome this week. Mitch, MC1 Gamer, started up a new series. I believe it's called Build Me a List, where viewers send him in a list of what they have in their collection for a particular faction, and he's going to be doing a series of shows breaking that down and building a competitive list for match play out of what the viewer gives him, which I think is a really awesome way to go over the tactics of each faction and the different pros and cons of units and different unit selection, and just how you think about, do I pick X, do I pick Y, what things do I want? I thought it was a really cool idea. I'll probably be sending something his way just to fuel the fun a little bit over there. I think it's a really cool idea. I definitely encourage everybody to go check that out. I think there's a lot of really good insight into what things to pick, and some other thoughts too on some suggestions on what models to pick up that he didn't have in his collection already that would be good additions that wouldn't even necessarily be that expensive. So yeah, definitely go check that one out.
I will send him a list before I make my eventual trip kind of along the eastern seaboard to get in games with all you guys. I'll send him a list right before I get there, and then we'll watch his response so I can get greater insight into how Mitch thinks, so I can build a better army to crush him. It's all part of the master plan.
Well,
yes. All three of those channels are great. They have lots of great tactical insight content. So again, if you enjoy this show and what Paul and I do on a regular basis, you would probably also enjoy all three of them. And again, all three will have links listed below. But I think really with what you just mentioned, with Mitch's new video series, is the perfect segue into our topic this week.
Yeah.
On the importance of your general and building your army around him. So do you want me to go ahead, Paul, or do you want to take this?
I can start off a little bit because I think this is something that I've given a lot of thought to, and not just in Warhammer necessarily, but a lot of different kinds of gaming. One of the things that I think, especially new players that have a decent sized collection, they go into competitive play thinking, I want to start playing, or somebody that had a pre-existing collection, especially that's coming over from 8th edition, that's just picking up the game now and jumping into Age of Sigmar. It's like, okay, where do I begin building my list? And in prior editions of Warhammer, it didn't actually matter that much what model was your general most of the time, right? But now, since each general has really unique abilities, there's something that you can either really build around, or you can have it be the focal point of your army and use it as a really good starting point for building your list. So I know I've got a couple of examples I was thinking of. I'm sure James, you actually prepared a whole lot for this one and took a whole bunch of notes. So
I did.
Yeah. Yeah, so the addition of the General's Handbook as well is really interesting, because now we don't have just, what general do I pick? It's what command traits do I pick? What artifacts do I pick to go along with my general to make everything work the way that I want it to? And, it's really not an arbitrary choice. It's not like a default sort of choice that you're making. In some factions, there's not a lot of selection, right? You might have like one or two heroes to choose from. But when you're looking at a broader picture of, mixing factions together, or working with some of the legacy factions that have a lot of, discontinued heroes, a lot of the old unique heroes that have some really interesting and characterful abilities that have a lot of power on the battlefield as well. They really make for some interesting starting points to build an army around. And I guess that's sort of, the point of what we were trying to get at here is, building from your general is one of the ways that you can really construct your army in Age of Sigmar. It's getting high possible you would in a prior edition. Now it's really like, your general is the focal point of your army and is the basis for like the character of your army. So so many of these guys are just begging to be built around, and I'm really excited for it. I know I need to just kind of get more models to a lot more of the Empire heroes and Bretonnian heroes to make things a little more interesting in my own games.
And there is always the option, to use the example that you talked about of models that are discontinued like heroes, there's always the option for converting. And most shops, like even my two local GWs, or at least the two closest ones, neither of the store managers mind if you bring in like a converted model or a model that's not a GW based miniature or whatever. They've really been quite open about it. So, for example, Tomb Kings or Bretonnia, that are both discontinued armies, a lot of those heroes, if you find, for example, like a Reaper model or kit bash some GW kits together, you can certainly make an acceptable alternative. So really, there's nothing out of reach to you as the player.
Yeah, definitely. Actually, my local GW, the owner there, he has a really awesome Nurgle army. He did a bunch of conversions on, and his Soul Grinder is like kit bashed with like 3 or 4 different kits and a ton of green stuff and a really sweet paint job. So yeah, it seems like if you're maybe at least starting with like a base of a GW model, like they're pretty open to it, because they're selling green stuff, they're selling all these different kits. They're encouraging people to get creative with things.
Right. I think that you put it pretty well. If you don't mind, I wasn't going to touch too deeply. I was going to let you get back to like kind of your thought process on the general, but I looked at it just a little bit different in terms of like your general is in many ways, I'd say in AOS, kind of needs to be the cornerstone of your army that's built around, because the potential impact, whether or not it's a beat stick or a buff wagon or whatever your potential role for your general is huge. Especially with like the artifacts being free and the command traits being free, I'd say realistically your general is almost always going to be undercosted when compared to similar units that don't have those abilities, right? So, so he's the most bang for your buck. And so I looked at it as, look at the points in the scenario and, and kind of consider like, what do you need to do to win that scenario? And then look at it from the sense of, okay, now that I know basically here's the objective of the scenario, how much of my force can I comfortably commit towards my general, and don't exceed that. If you're playing a 1,000 and the scenario is capture 5 points or the majority of these 5 points and hold them at the end of the game, we'll say turn 6. And, and again, you only have those 1,000 points and you have to bring 2 battle line and you can have your commander. You may not want to bring a roughly 500-point commander to lead that army because you may struggle to have enough of an army to complete that objective. And then secondly, look at the options that you have available to you in your faction and consider the role that you want your general to play on the table and which of those models available to you is best going to be able to fulfill that role. And then thirdly, and that's what I called your goal, right? Your general's goal on the battlefield. And if your general's non-unique, so not like an Arcane in the Black or a Nagash or something, where you actually can pick an artifact and a command trait for them, then make sure that the artifact and command trait that you're picking aligns with the goal that you have for your general. Like, you want everything pointing in one direction. You don't want to pick a buff wagon general that your goal is to never have in combat, and then give him a command trait and an artifact that buffs him to be mediocre in combat, whenever your goal for him was sit back and support the rest of your army.
Right. Yeah, that's actually, I think you touched on 2 things there that I think are really important. There's really a balance, right, between taking the unique characters that have some more powerful and more interesting abilities, but then you can't take an artifact and you can't take a command trait. Well, you can take an artifact, but you can take it on a different hero. But right. You can't take it on that hero. So you're making a sacrifice to get those other abilities. Are those abilities powerful enough in your list or the list that you want to build to justify not taking a command trait and possibly not taking any artifacts? That is a rules point, too, that I think it doesn't really leap out in the rule book. I don't think it's kind of buried in there a little bit. So it's one that I think people really need to watch out for, right? That you don't want to roll up to an event and say, oh, I'm going to take this unique general and have, take this artifact on him and this command trait. And, you've planned your whole list around that thing. And then you find out, oh, I can't do that. One game with your buddies is one thing, but if you're trying to roll up to a tournament or something like that, that could be a problem.
Make sure that you know whether or not you'll be rolling for these kinds of things or whether you can pick them, because again, that comes into how effective will your general be at completing his goal if he's going to have random things assigned to him. Is that a huge enough impact to where maybe you want to pick a unique hero or somebody else to be your general?
Yeah. And here's an interesting question that you just made me think of. If you're going to go to an event, this is kind of a little bit of an aside, but definitely plays into what we're talking about here. Let's say you're going to an event, and that event you're going to be rolling for command traits and rolling for artifacts instead of choosing them. Does that make you more likely to take a unique hero, go them, because of the uncertainty of what you're going to get?
For myself, no. And I say that only because if I know that I'm going to be going to this kind of an event, right? I've already got the list built out in my head, right? And if there's going to be the random effects like this, then my mindset going into it will be, okay, the goal of my general will be X. My general is the best choice that I can make for that goal. I have equipped my general in whatever way I can best do that, because there's almost always a couple weapon options or whatever. So I've done the most I can with what's in my control to make my general able to advance that goal. I'm not going to depend at all on the artifact or the command trait with how I'm building my force. And if I roll one that's beneficial, then that's a bonus. That's an additional, help to my army, additional resource that I didn't plan for. I'm not going to, in a randomized situation like that, because Age of Sigmar is random enough as it is, I don't want to add the additional variable of I really need to get this command trait and I really need to get this artifact, because realistically that's a 1 in 36 chance of getting the exact pair you want for that, that perfect optimization. And you don't want to put too much weight in a single 1 in 36 chance before the game even starts. But also within the Death faction, I would say that other than maybe Manfred and Neferata, I don't really feel like the unique heroes have that powerful of command traits, especially when compared to the generic heroes. More often than not, I would choose a generic hero just based off the command ability that they have on their war scroll alone.
Yeah. I think for me, I think it does shift the value, because you're thinking about, when I'm choosing a general, I'll be thinking about how do I pair the command traits and artifacts with them. And if I'm not certain to get the one that I want, it makes those individually weaker, right? Because you don't know what you're going to get. You might randomly get the lucky thing, or you might not. So I'm just going to not rely on it. So I think it makes me comparatively more likely to take a unique hero if I'm going to be rolling on a table, just because the certainty would increase the value of the generic heroes. And by not having that certainty in there, it comparatively gives them a slight power down. Because if you think about it this way, you're getting free stuff with these abilities. And when you're evaluating which hero you're going to take to be your general, if you're going to be rolling on the table instead of choosing your trait, it might as well not even be there, because you could end up wanting, in order, you could end up wanting to get rerolling charges, and you get +1 wound to your general.
Right.
And if there's that kind of differential, I don't want to try and count on that in any way. And a lot of those unique generals are slightly powered down as a result. I mean, I'm sorry, the generic generals are slightly powered down as a result.
Right. I think that death might be, and again, when I say death, I'm always referring to it as kind of the stuff that's outside of the two larger built-up sub-factions of the Tomb Kings and the Flesh Eater Courts. I'm just talking about the rest that doesn't fall into that.
Everything that used to be vampire counts.
Right, basically. I don't really think that, I think that we're kind of in the unique place that our unique heroes are not really that impressive as commanders. Yep. Typically.
The interesting thing, from the armies that I play, King Luen Leoncourt from the Bretonnians, he's their unique general type of character, and be almost as good on the board as not being your general. I would almost take him as a second supplementary character, because he, regardless of him being your general, he's still giving your whole board immune to battle shock for the entire game. So being able to take him and in addition also take a general, because his command ability is not that strong. He's just giving +1 to hit to your Bretonnian Knights. So it's not that exciting. So you can almost take him as like a secondary character, right? So that's definitely something to think about too in selection of your general. A lot of these generals have some other static ability sitting on them that you don't need them to be your general for. So you might want to keep them in your list as another hero giving off those abilities, but have something else be your general so that you're stacking your buffs in the right way.
Right.
So do you have examples?
Yeah. I was gonna ask real quick. Do you have, I guess, like a way that you lean towards your objective, your goal, right, for your general, like to accomplish? Like, is there a typical build that you say, this is typically the goal I'm aiming for with my general? Not necessarily typical build and saying, I always take this hero with this artifact and this command trait.
Right.
I mean, more of you're like, I want my general to provide the buffs and kind of hang out the back, or typically I want my general to be more of the beat stick up front, because I know that I tend towards, I want my general to be the beat stick at the front.
Yeah, I think in the armies that I play in general, the generals are really best used as a supplement to your army. They really lead from the back. And they're going to be using their command abilities or their static abilities to buff your guys, and you want to preserve them as much as possible. So that kind of makes me lean more a lot towards a general that has powerful command abilities, powerful static abilities. I don't really care how much of a fight they're going to be able to get in. And it also really leads me a lot towards not caring about the more fighty traits on the command trait table or the more fighty artifacts. I'm usually looking more for defensive items for artifacts if I'm not taking any other heroes, or taking a command or a command trait that is going to be giving more buffs to my army without having to put my guy in too much of harm's way.
Right. Well, I actually had an example of basically both those ways. And really examples of how one was an army that I built, and one was the currently the only army that I've lost to an Age of Sigmar. And both took very different routes with that. So the first one's the army I lost to. And my opponent, Peter, who watches the show frequently, so a shout out to you, Peter. He beat me with the Death Faction army, and he did not use his general as a beat stick whatsoever. This was right after the point system came out in the General's Handbook in general came out. And he brought very much more of a support buff type hero of a Vampire Lord on a horse. And at first I thought, wow, that's kind of bold and risky, because that's a 5-wound model that if it dies, and you lose some pretty good abilities, including deathless minions, because that was at the time before it had been FAQ'd. So we had interpreted it as every one of your heroes now basically gives your army a 5-up ward instead of a 6-up, but it's been FAQ'd that only your commander does. So if he'd lost that general, that would have been huge. He would have lost, basically the most important thing to keep his army around. But he made it to where he was very smart with his army composition, and he knew what goal he wanted his general to accomplish. So he brought large blocks of zombies and things that could tar pit, and a large group of hex wraiths, 10 of them, that he could buff with his Vampire Lord's command ability, and use his magic or her magic to debuff whoever they were fighting. The command ability of that particular model gives +1 to attack to all of their weapons, and then the debuff that it can also use is -1 attack to all of an opponent's weapons. So in conjunction, those two work quite well. But he brought Manfred as well, and he brought the one actually on the Abyssal Terror, so the big scary beat stick. He also brought a Terrorgeist and an additional Vampire Lord on horse, and spread that one out on the other side of the battlefield to buff some other faster moving units like dire wolves and stuff. So he had basically this, and some spirit hosts and all, and he had this army that, he's like, I want my hero to be able to sit back at the back, be pretty well protected, and just kind of hand out little buffs here and there where they're needed to, help my forces the most. And but not be the big scary thing, because this way my opponent has to focus on Manfred and Terrorgeist and things like that, and for now leave my general alone, or else basically be devastated by those two big scary monsters. And it worked quite well. I attempted at one point to attack as general, but so few of my resources on the table were able to do that without basically placing my entire army at risk, to where that was really the best defense for a general he could have had. And then the other example, which is taking the other end of the spectrum, but I also wanted to highlight in this particular example how important it is to build the rest of your army around a beat stick and have them do other things. Was I brought Lady Sinessa, like I try to always do, which is a vampire lord on a zombie dragon, which has, I gave her the Death Lance and the shield and the Blood Chalice because it cost me nothing to do so. So she's quite survivable, can take a beating and heal quite quickly. And then I gave her the Ring of Immortality that brings her back if she dies the first time, automatically. And I gave her the Red Fury command ability. So if she, or command trait, so if she inflicts wounds in combat, then I roll a d6, and if I roll less than what she rolls, she immediately attacks again, which is really easy to do because with her lance, she's putting out 3 attacks at 3 damage on the charge, and then her zombie dragon can put out an insane amount of damage as well. He can put out somewhere in the neighborhood of, I think, 11 or 12 wounds in close combat each turn, and that's just at average rolling. That's not even, abnormally high. So it's almost automatic. And so in that army, I had brought some Blood Knights to kind of send up with her to assist her in kind of the hammer blow roll. And then I had 4 units of zombies, I think it was, 10-man groups, and then I had Vlad von Karstein because, as I've said before, he's an absolute steal at 120 points, especially with the match play system of him handing out that 6-up ward save to everything around him. And so anyways, having Vlad kind of be there to anchor the anvil that was these zombies, and really deny, to have board control and deny my opponent the ability to kind of move around the battlefield as he wished. And then having Sinessa and her Blood Knights really ride around and hit important targets wherever they needed to eliminate them from the battlefield, worked quite well together. But obviously I had to plan, a good kind of tar pit defensive force to really bring out her hammer abilities to the maximum if I wanted to win beyond just trying to table my opponent, which was not at all what the objective was, and actually would have been impossible with this particular scenario because wiped out regular squads if they were 10 men or more, came back the next turn. So a tabling would have been impossible.
Yeah. I definitely have the same kind of thoughts on this. I definitely do, in addition to kind of having the buff wagon build, I do also like to occasionally bring the, hammer general build. And what I like to use for that is the Bretonnian Lord. He, out of the box, he's moving 16 inches when he's on a Pegasus. He's got 5 attacks with his lance, hitting and wounding on 3s, has rend, does D3 damage, D3 plus 1 on the charge. And then if you make him your general, you can give him the legendary fighter ability to give him plus 1 attack on his lance, and then you can give him the relic blade artifact to give him plus 1 damage on his lance. So 140 points gets you, a dude with 6 attacks, 3-up, rend, D3 plus 2 damage on the charge. Just like completely ridiculous, right? Plus he has a Pegasus too with a couple of attacks on 4-up. Because we all know anybody that's ever played like Bretonnia or Empire or any other force that's like heavily mounted, that all of the damage really gets done by that horse trampling people, not the lances. Those are all just really made of rubber. They're for decoration. They're very pretty when they're Bretonnian lances. I assure you, they are beautiful. They have little flags on them and everything, but they are strictly decorative.
That's also true of the Black Knights.
Yes. the other thing that I did want to mention here too is that you don't have to put your, if you're not running any battalions, you just get one artifact, right? You don't have to put that on your general. And that's something I've been experimenting a lot with. I'll actually kind of split the difference, right, and give the command trait to a general on a horse, and then take an artifact and run a Bretonnian Lord and throw the artifact on him, giving him the +1 damage ability with the Relic Blade. So you kind of have, your guy that's buffing your dudes, and you got your guy that is just a hammer. And there's definitely some importance to thinking about running battalions to get extra artifacts. I've tried it, and it is brutal to have that extra stuff on the table. Plus, the battalions are usually pretty useful and not that expensive. So there's definitely some interesting different options. The interesting risk that you run with the Bretonnian Lord in particular is that his command ability is basically the same as one of the command traits. So if you're running his as your general and you're rolling for these abilities, I might not ever want to pick him as my general, right? Because I'm going to get a command trait that is almost exactly the same as his command ability, except better.
Right.
And I wonder, actually, if he's not the only one that's true of. I don't know if you happen to know of any other examples, but it seems like some of these abilities on the command traits could be redundant with what your general does to begin with. For re-rolling charges
for death
is definitely a thing that I've seen around before.
For death, there's not the exact, all of the a couple of the command traits and I believe all of the artifacts come from basically unique heroes, and they slightly altered them, but none of the generic heroes have that danger of kind of doubling up on the exact same thing like that for death, or for the vampire counts basically a subfaction of death.
Yeah. I think the reason that ability ends up in the Order book is because they discontinued Bretonnia and just still liked the ability. Wanted to be able to hand that to people.
And it's really important for a lot of the subfactions within Order, because, for example, the free peoples in general have lower braveries, typically around, 5, 6, 7?
Yep, they like to run.
Yeah.
Run.
So that kind of ability is obviously quite powerful with an army that one of their greatest weaknesses is their bravery. The battle shock phase is something that can obviously devastate any kind of low bravery army, which again is not something that I have to worry about.
Yeah. But that said, that also leads into some of your general. If you're running an army where a problem, are you going to be using your inspiring presence a lot instead of abilities? That's definitely something to consider. If that's going to happen, it makes your selection process for your general. You're not necessarily going to need them to have an awesome command ability if you're not actually going to ever use it.
Right.
That's really important. That's one of the things that, playing free people especially, I take a general on a horse almost every time, just because his command ability is just bonkers. It's so good. It ends up putting most of your shooting on 2 up, 2 up, or 2 up, 3 up, something like that. And it's just a brutal gun line to have to deal with. And it's, unless I'm really going with a very different strategy, it's just not really worth it to do anything but that. But if I was going to go with a different general, I would be really concerned about how do I prevent battle shock in my list. I've been giving some real thought to picking up Luen Leoncourt to add to my collection. His ability to give all of your guys immune to battle shock is really, really strong, especially when you're running an army that has really crappy bravery. Like, I mean, Skaven run away less than they do. That's like no joke. I've played against Skaven a few times, and it is just unreal when you get like two blocks, like a block of humans and a block of Skaven. They run into each other, and then more of them die from battle shock than they do from any weapon on the battlefield.
Yep. It's amusing to kind of imagine what's going on with all that. So, you talked about in particular like a few generals you like to take, and some other kind of support units, which kind of further builds into what I was talking about of like the goal of your general and then planning your army around that goal. And I think that one very important thing that we both mentioned but didn't really dive too deeply on is if you're picking a general that is more of that support class, because in Age of Sigmar there's not the ability to hide your general in a squad like you can in 40K or Classic Fantasy, that your general is susceptible to being sniped. And so I've really come to view it as the best bodyguard unit, basically, that you can have in the game is something big and scary that your opponent needs to focus on, that becomes more of that urgent priority for them to deal with than your buff wagon. And so I was just going to ask, like, so let's take, we can take any one of the points values that the General's Handbook talks about. I would probably say 2,000 is the most commonly played, at least from what I'm hearing and from locally. And I was going to ask, I mentioned it kind of in my top 3 things to kind of consider initially, but in that kind of a setting, a 2,000 point list, what would you consider, like, I'm not necessarily talking about a specific number, like I'm not saying like you have to say 25% of your points or whatever, but how much of your force would you be comfortable in putting into that kind of big, scary beat stick in the effort to protect that cornerstone of your general?
That is an interesting question. A lot of the forces that I take are a little bit more defensive to begin with. So you're really doing a lot more of sitting back, shooting, waiting for your opponent to advance on you, kind of having that little dance going on. So I don't so much take the big scary unit that is going to distract attention. I would rather stick my general around my shooters because they're going to be creating like area denial. They're going to make your opponent not want to come anywhere near your general. And, especially when you have the stand and shoot abilities that the handgunners have and the crossbows have, it really is a major deterrent for your opponent entering that part of the battlefield. And it lets you kind of fight on the outskirts with your big heavy hitters that don't need as many buffs. So that's more of the strategy that I take a lot with it.
So you kind of like pseudo hide your general within the squad by taking advantage of their rules.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
I know for myself, again, because I don't normally take the buff wagon type hero. Now, I talked about last week a particular list that can take advantage of Magic, even in this weakened state that Magic is in compared to the open play system. With Arcane the Black being capable against, I guess, your kind of mid-level hitters, but definitely not a big heavy puncher. So let's turn the table real quick, because you're gonna have to imagine here, because I know you haven't done this. So if you're playing a list, and we'll say, for example, you're bringing a Karl Franz or a General on Griffin. I'm not sure if you've ever actually done this, and made that your general. How comfortable are you in like what level of support do you give him in terms of types of things that can ride out with him? Like, are you going very much the Theoden Rohirrim charge against the orcs at Minas Tirith, where you're like, everything's going in with that commander, or are you, in that kind of beat stick role to support him, or are you going to take a larger percentage of your points and say, these are, the guys to hold the line while my general goes around and has his fun, or, they're going to be holding objectives. Like, if your general's more of a beat stick, how do you approach, kind of the other aspect of your army, or do you just say, we're going 100% full throttle?
Oh, we are keeping it 100. We are going full court press if we are going to gear up for an aggressive general. That's how I like to roll. The times that the one time that I can remember recently that I took a general on a Griffin, I also took the Empire Knight Battalion. So I was taking like 2 units of Knights for chaff, and then 2 units of Demigriffs to be heavy hitters. And it all they started off on the flanks. And this was actually the battle report that I did. They kind of started off on the flanks and converged in front of my general. And it did a ton of damage. What was really funny in that game, and I don't think I really mentioned in my battle report, is that my general kind of hung back a little bit for a while and then crashed and burned after it got charged. So that game in particular actually really gave me pause to dropping a lot of points into my general, or even dropping a lot of points into one unit, because of how badly a unit in Age of Sigmar can just get wrecked in one round of combat.
Right. That's why, for myself, again, tending to go for more of that play style with my general, I almost always invest in that Ring of Immortality, or whatever it's called. I believe that's the name, because, like with Lady Sinessa, that's that's like that safety net. It's like, well, she got obliterated by 5 Empire cannons in like 1 turn, but she's coming back, and the rest of my army was not taking that fire this turn. And, I can move her behind cover, or she can kind of pick off straggler units. She has ways to heal herself, or just drink that blood chalice. Like right then, that's actually what I tend to do. Is she's never died yet, but if she does, the plan is ring her back up with the D3 wounds, and then use the blood chalice to heal D6 more. So she just pops right back up. So I do have kind of a way to play around that. I know for myself, I've never gone that kind of full out. I think it's too much against my nature. I talked about this in a topic of the week response, how I tend to afford more of a defensive play style. It's just my natural inclination. I am very hesitant in most games to commit to that all-out offensive press unless I know that victory is assured. I very much look for more of the opportunistic moments of, hey, I can kind of trade 2 for 1 here. That kind of attitude. And death in open play was very refreshing for me, because it's like, I don't even care. Like, I have basically unlimited resources, even though I would limit myself with my summoning. I still theoretically had that. And again, since we've entered this match play point system where I don't have unlimited resources potentially at my disposal, and everything again does matter. It's definitely shaped my playstyle to where even if I bring a general and those Blood Knights in a 1,000 point list, which I believe was the point total for that game where I talked about the example of bringing Vlad and the zombies and all, I still invest a significant portion in terms of model count. The vast majority of my army was in that defensive role to kind of balance it out and be able to focus more on the objectives while my hammer, kind of picks off. It's more of like a surgical strike kind of idea. In that game, it was quite effective because the Blood Knights and Lady Sinessa killed a dwarf organ gun, a dwarf king, which was my opponent's general, and a unit of what's their gunner unit called? The ones with like the hand cannons.
Iron Drakes, I believe.
Yeah, they killed a unit of those quite early on, and then just basically claim that half of the battlefield. But I'm very hesitant to. I always always go for that kind of middle road, which is it's just my inclination, my nature.
Yeah, so that actually brings up something else too. Is some of these generals are really built to like lead from the front and give buffs to guys when they're in combat, or like they want to be on the front line, right?
Right.
I'm thinking, just as some example, in the Khorne Bloodbound, the Aspiring Deathbringer, he gives extra attacks to your guys, but he has to be like within 6 inches of them. So he has to be on the front line.
Yep. And I think that there's another, isn't there another Khorne hero that if he killed something, it gives bonuses to the nearby units?
Yeah. Yep.
I know that
the
Slaughter Priest. Okay, yeah. I know the Slaughter Priest, if he kills something, it adds to his prayer, which is quite powerful, but to where he can't fail it, hurt himself. But I was thinking there was another one that actually buffed units around him with that.
Yeah, and that's an interesting, different way to, there's that couple of different ways that you can approach a Bloodbound list, where you're taking the general that's going to be leading from the front and giving you a lot of extra attacks. You can take a general that is going to hang back a little bit more and give your guys charge bonuses. There's some other buffs that you can get from different generals. There's a lot of different ways to build it. When you're starting with Bloodbound as your core. And I'm always a fan of throwing in, Slaves to Darkness and giving them all Khorne marks just to round that out.
Right.
And it seems like, the orcs have a lot of things there too that they want your general keeping up with the rest of your guys.
Right. Very much, a lot of their command traits are very much like a radius around them, get +1 attack or something like that. And it's typically not a huge radius. And it's like, okay, well, if your orc on Maw Crusher isn't in the front lines, first off, what are you doing? That's a huge waste of that model's capability and those points. But secondly, you're not taking advantage of that cornerstone piece being able to elevate the rest of your army and really advance your chances of victory if you're not up there in their face with that in-your-face kind of general.
Yeah. And that really is like, it brought up, investing a lot of points into your general and having, a general on a monster and things like that. Things that, what do you do when you're going to have that big face beady general? And my thought on that really is, I wouldn't necessarily take them as my general. I wouldn't have a problem taking them in my list. But if I'm going to take them in my list, I don't know that I'm going to want them to also be my general, so that they're like a target for 2 different reasons.
Right.
So they could kind of spread things out. I would take like a general on a Griffin. I think I'm more likely now to take a general on a Griffin as just another unit in my army than I am to take him as my general.
Right. So actually that brought me to actually the next question I was going to ask. And do you have anything else that you really want to cover? Because I thought that this question, if we kind of went out with this, would actually be the perfect way to end today's episode. So do you have anything else you want to throw in?
Okay. No, I think I'm good. Hit me with it.
Okay. So we've already established that I think actually to the benefit of this episode and this whole conversation that you and I are on different ends of the spectrum on what we like to make our actual general like that's in charge that has the command traits and all. And so I wanted to pitch to you, why do you choose that? Like what is, if you basically had to explain to somebody, I picked this kind of general, here's the reason why. And that can include actually I'd say that absolutely includes the goal that you have for your general on the battlefield. So if you want to go ahead and pitch to us, like, this is what I take and why, and I guess to some degree, like, we're not necessarily arguing against each other, but why do you be explaining to someone in an attempt to kind of be persuasive on this is why this is the right way?
I like to not put all of my eggs in one basket. And I think by taking, I usually go with a less expensive general, usually a free guild general on a horse, occasionally, a Bretonnian lord or something like that, or one of the special characters that's not that expensive. Starting with that as my base, and then also having other heroes in my army that I'm throwing other command traits on, or I'm sorry, not command traits, other artifacts on. It spreads things out, and it lets you take a relatively inexpensive general that he's really there functioning as a buff wagon. He's sitting in the back. If your opponent wants to shoot at him or go after him, if you lose him, it's not that big of a deal. And then you have other assets on the battlefield as well. That's kind of my thought. I take the free guild general on a horse a lot with his hold the line command ability. He likes to hang back and just hang out with the guys that shoot and not be particularly aggressive. A lot of times I'll either take the trait that gives him one additional wound, or I'll go with reckless and give charge bonuses to my guys. But that one has a wide enough range. It's 10 inches from them when they charge. So that's keeping you on average like 17, 20 inches away from your opponent's models. So he's really like hanging way back. And that's really the kind of idea that I go with. What I really like a lot is to run a second hero and give that second hero my artifact to kind of spread the wealth around a little bit. And a lot of heroes that you can give your artifacts to are actually really potent for their point value. So if you're adding on top of that, they're getting an artifact as well to make them even more potent on the battlefield. You have a really nice, cheap hunter sort of hero roaming around the battlefield and taking out some targets of opportunity, acting as a distraction. It creates like a nice, well-balanced, well-rounded kind of list, I think.
So I guess to sum it up, would it be fair to say you're kind of providing, for defensive purposes for your general, a sense of target saturation for your opponent?
Yes, exactly. I want to make it so they don't know what to go after.
Makes sense. I actually take, and I understand, and I definitely can empathize with that viewpoint. For myself, the reason I take the big heavy beat stick, first off, because I spent so much time and I'm still not done with that converted Vampire Lord on Zombie Dragon. I think I'm at, good grief, somewhere around like a day and a half to 2 days worth of time put into converting, painting, building it up, and everything. So yeah, there's been a big labor of love. So that's obviously a big part of why I want to put it on the table. But from a tactical standpoint, I know my general is going to be a big target, especially in death. If you have set aside points to summon, then boom, your general's automatically, or any other wizard, is automatically a bigger target. If your general is a spellcaster and the ability to just cast spells other than summoning, you're a bigger target. If your general is combat oriented in any way, shape, or form, which the majority of the death heroes are, other than things like necromancers, they have pretty good combat ability, they're a bigger target. If they're a behemoth, which of the death heroes are, they're a bigger target. And so I really look at it in the sense that no matter what I choose for my commander in death, unless I'm going to have like a white king who's going to basically be inept as a commander when compared to these other things, they're going to be a huge target. And so I look at that and I say, fine, I'm going to run with that, and I'm going to make this general that's so big and nasty and tough that either you're going to have to commit way too many resources to bringing it down, or if you throw your big scary things at it to bring it down, it's going to beat them. That's my goal. I want my general to be so powerful and to take like that beat stick hero and just elevate it to that next level. Then unless you've brought a general that's a beat stick, or you've brought someone like an Archaon who is just ridiculous in and of themselves, you're not going to be able to match that thing one for one. And unless you are able to, throw those cannon shots into it or bog it down or whatever it might be, which is hard because almost all the death behemoths fly as well. So we can get away quite easily, and they're quite quick. Unless you really can bog it down or kill it with a bunch of combined fire, it's going to do some serious damage to you. And so many of the death command traits and abilities that you get and the commander abilities are really beneficial to horde type units. And so, if I have my zombies up at the front or skeletons or whatever it might be, then having my general just add that overwhelming amount of like firepower that one unit can bring into that combat and just crush the opponent, kind of start that domino effect of, my zombies are in combat, my general leaps into this combat, crushes the opponent, then all of a sudden, boom, that's more resources I can put into these other combats and try to continue that domino effect. That's really kind of my goal and my thought process behind taking that super heavy beat stick that, sure, he's the biggest target on the table for my opponent, but he's going to be a big target anyway, so I'm just going to embrace it and run with it. I'm going to give you a reason to be afraid of him.
I do have a question about this approach that
Sure.
you've taken here. Have you ever had somebody really concentrate fire with heavy artillery on them?
Yes.
And what did you have shooting at you?
I've had the only time I've actually had a lot of shooting come at it was in that dwarf game where he had the entire squad of iron whatevers shooting at them, and the organ gun just firing everything it had. He was loading extra rounds into it. He was sitting on one of those mystical hills so he could get the rerolls to wounds and all, and he was just peppering it with every shot he had, and throwing units at it in close combat as quickly as he could.
Interesting. Was he shooting at it with like cannons and organ guns and all that jazz too?
Yeah, he had the organ gun and then the one squad that was shooting, because this was a 1,000 point game, so it was relatively small. I haven't come across like a pure shooting army with this particular general, right? And that would definitely impact where I put her on the board. And the fact that he had the organ gun and he had the shooting squad next to it did definitely give me some hesitation, but I knew that I needed to kill that organ gun and I needed to kill that general. So, I had to commit to that strategy of either I'm going to take this down or I'm going to die trying, because if I kill this stuff, I win. If I don't kill it, I'll probably lose, because it'll just be enough to just grind down my army. But fortunately, because of the Deathless Minions ability, which does apply to your hero, and then there's certain other ways in Death to gain additional protection for some units, for example, Ghoul King on Terrorgeist can cast his magic on himself to give him a 5-up, basically ward save. There's so many ways that you can buff your saves or give yourself additional saves against mortal wounds that going into it, I was like, okay, this is the strategy I need to use to keep my hero alive to get there. So, for example, she was casting Mystic Shield on herself each turn. She had a Vampiric Shield, and so she was rocking a 2-up save before any Rend came into the picture. And then she had her 5-up save for that game, basically a ward save. So the Withering Amount of Fire wasn't able to do a whole lot, and I knew that even if it did, unless it completely killed me that one turn, and I really needed to heal quickly, I had the options available to me with the Blood Chalice or the Ring of Immortality, or her just going into combat and killing something.
Interesting. Well, I would be very curious to see what would happen against, a really big, like a 2,000 point game with that kind of level of gun lining. I would be really curious to see what would happen. But your general kind of having a default 5-up ward save in games like that is just gross. That is just absurd.
Yeah. If I knew I was going to come up against that kind of a list, I'd actually probably be bringing the Terrorgeist that I mentioned, because then he'd be rocking a 4-up, 5-up, 5-up against non-mortal
Yeah.
wounds. Yeah. And then
That
just a
is
5-up, 5-up against mortal. Yeah.
That's just wrong.
It's what we need, because unless you bring the Tomb Kings, we don't have shooting to counter you back.
Right.
So we've got to be able to survive that gunfire, at least mathematically have it be possible.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah.
Well, unfortunately, yeah.
So should you actually end up making your cross-country road trip, I'll have to show you what a little cannon fire looks like.
I will be prepared for it. I'm actually looking at alternate companies' miniatures right now to get some supposed Tomb Kings, so I can bring a lot of skeleton archers and stuff, so that I will not be the only one, especially when I face you, Paul, that doesn't have that's just being shot, right? I want to be able to shoot back. Like, I'm looking at Screaming Skull catapults and these skeleton archers and skeleton horse archers, so that I can shoot back at you.
Yeah. Yep.
I want an adaptable army. I think that's the biggest thing. But unfortunately, today we don't have a misplay of the day. Neither of us were able to get in games between last episode and this one. I'm getting a game in this weekend, so hopefully I'll have a misplay of the day ready for next week. I know much the disappointment of everyone who likes to point and laugh at the people who talk about tactics all day and then make such gross blunders in game.
Yep.
So I'm sorry to deny you all. Sorry to deny that for this week, but we'll have one next week for sure.
Hopefully next week we have a double point and laugh. That is my goal.
Yeah, that sounds good. Well, Paul, do you have any final thoughts before we close it out?
You know, what I did want to just kind of announce along those lines, mentioning the double misplay of the day, hopefully next week. I am actually going to be taking all of next week off from work. I'm actually going to be starting a new job, and I decided to take a week off in between the two. So I'm going to be devoting like a whole week pretty much just to Warhammer. So look forward to a lot of new videos, battle reports. I don't know. Me actually being prepared for this show for a change.
You do a pretty good job improving, Paul, so don't worry too much about it.
Yeah, I'm pretty good with improv thing, because I do not come into these things terribly prepared.
Right.
But yeah, we're going to have, I know Maroc Wolf has been having his month of the wolf. I'm going to do a nice little consolidated week of the great Paul Conti on YouTube. So should have a lot of good content coming for all of you guys.
I look forward to it. I will make sure, as always, to link Paul's channel below so that you all, if you're not subscribers of him, first off, you should be. His channel's great. He is my favorite YouTube content producer. That's why I put up with him on this show, as I said last week. So you should really check out his stuff, especially next week. That'll be a good time to jump on if you haven't already. I've really covered everything that I hope to cover, and then some, in this video. I really hope that this is legitimately useful. That's always my goal, is I want someone, I don't care how new the player or whatever, to be able to gain something useful from these. Like, I enjoy being able to offer entertainment value for everybody else, as I obviously enjoy the entertainment value of everyone else's YouTube content, but I want to be helpful to somebody. That's why I want to do this show. So I hope that, that in some capacity to somebody out there, we were able to help you with building your list and picking your general. But
yeah, and I share the same sentiment, definitely. Part of my reason for being on YouTube in general was that I do a lot of this stuff, like the math hammering and all of that kind of stuff. Most of this would be going on anyway, like over here, if I didn't have a YouTube channel. So yeah. I thought that it would be nice. Maybe somebody else out there can, get some utility out of it. So It's really out there for you guys, as well as giving me a reason to keep on churning stuff out and getting better and get more in depth on everything.
Absolutely. So I guess with those final closing thoughts and real deep heart moments to close this out.
I got the feels over here, man. I got the feels.
Right. Well, I mean, I expect as much coming from where you come from. But with that,
all about the feels.
Another Tactica Tuesday comes to a close. So until next time, happy gaming, everybody.